Honestly, every bit of this has been completely baffling to me from the start. About 11 years ago, I finished college and moved back to my hometown. I'd put myself through school without any financial help, which wasn't easy, but it gave me the freedom to work wherever I wanted afterward. I managed to land a solid, well-paying job that I was proud of. As my career took off, I often had to travel to a nearby city for work. It was during one of those trips that I bumped into an old college acquaintance, Brian. We weren't exactly close friends, but we always had good conversations when we crossed paths. Eventually, Brian helped me navigate some approvals for a project I was working on, and after a few weeks, everything went through. Out of the blue, Brian became the CEO of a company his wife's parents had started. Her name was Jenna. I met my future wife, Rachel, at a casual get-together at their place. Rachel was finishing up her degree and still living with her retired parents downtown. Somehow we clicked. We started dating, things got serious quickly, and 6 months in, Rachel found out she was pregnant. I proposed right then and there. She said yes, on one condition, that I move to the regional city where she lived. I agreed. We had a small wedding, and Brian and Jenna came. Rachel's parents gave us a 3-bedroom apartment as a wedding gift, one that had been passed down from her aunt. It was put in Rachel's name. Soon, we had our son. Not long after, Rachel got pregnant again and gave birth to our daughter. Thanks to Brian's referral, I landed a job with a well-known and respected organization. I settled into the role quickly and built a reputation as a competent, trustworthy specialist. Unsurprisingly, the company Brian ran often ended up as the preferred contractor on construction jobs, especially when I was representing the client. Work was going great, and the money was even better. Fast forward 10 years, our son was about to start 4th grade, and our daughter was heading into 2nd. 2 weeks ago, I was in a hotel conference room for some intense contract negotiations. Things were dragging, so we took a break. I stepped out onto the balcony with a representative from the Capitol, and we grabbed a table to chat. As we looked down at the lobby, the rep made a passing comment about how Brian was still married to Jenna and apparently still head over heels for her, even if, old habits die hard. I followed his gaze and saw Brian at the front desk, with his girlfriend. Just a few steps away, standing at the kiosk, was my wife, Rachel. They finished up and walked together toward the elevator. My first instinct was to run down there and beat the crap out of Brian. But I stopped myself. That would have blown up the negotiations, caused a public scene, and probably pushed me straight into a divorce. Not exactly a smart move. My mind was racing. I asked the guy I was talking to how long he'd known Brian. He told me he'd been living in the area for years and knew him well. He said Brian had married Jenna shortly after college. Jenna's family was wealthy, her dad was a successful businessman with several ventures, and Brian had quickly taken over as CEO in one of the companies. But this guy warned me. He said he never did business with Brian because the guy couldn't be trusted. When the negotiations wrapped up and the contract was signed, I headed back to my office. I sat down at my desk, just numb, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. One thing was clear, I couldn't stay married to Rachel. At the same time, I had to figure out how to keep being a father to our kids. I needed a place to live after the divorce. The apartment we were in belonged to Rachel. It was technically gifted to us, but the title was in her name. The best option was to move back in with my parents. Thank God they had a 2-story house with an empty 2nd floor. Rachel had never even visited my hometown. She always said there was nothing for her there. But I had to leave. And I had to do it in a way that wouldn't break my promise to take the kids to the beach this year. I couldn't lie to them. So I started making a plan. I knew Brian and Jenna's routines pretty well. Jenna often had lunch at this little cafe across town from their offices. She said the food was better there. She'd invited Rachel and me to eat there a few times, but now it made sense why Rachel never went. And why Brian stayed away too. The next day, I decided to visit that cafe myself. And that's where I saw her, Jenna. I took a seat at her table, and Jenna greeted me warmly. I asked if she was trying out the local cuisine, but she smiled and said that wasn't exactly why she was there. I cut to the chase and asked if this was about Brian and Rachel. She nodded and confirmed it. I admitted I'd had my suspicions about them for a while, but I never had any proof. Brian was always home right on time, never slipped up. Jenna asked me where I'd caught them, and I told her it was at a downtown hotel. I happened to see them together while Brian was checking out. He had a friend working there as the hotel director, so it all made sense. She wanted to know how long they'd been seeing each other, and I said it started before I'd even met Rachel. That floored her. Jenna was visibly upset, especially since Brian had introduced Rachel to her as just a friend of mine. I told her I'd taken a DNA test, just to be absolutely sure about the kids. Jenna, in turn, confided something that stunned me: Brian couldn't have kids. He had undergone treatment for years, but it hadn't worked. She had always wanted children, but it never happened for them. We talked about what we were going to do. I told her I planned to divorce Rachel and even change my last name to distance myself from everything. Jenna said she was thinking about divorcing Brian too, but she wanted hard evidence first. We discussed the idea of setting up webcams to catch them red-handed. I agreed to stay in touch and help her with the plan. I explained that I needed to move out since the apartment was technically in Rachel's name. Jenna offered to talk to her father about helping me find a new place to live. We agreed to meet again in a few days to finalize everything. Over the next week, I quietly prepared for my separation from Rachel. I notified the school that we'd be moving and arranged for our kids to be transferred to a different school in a new city. I handled the enrollment paperwork during my lunch breaks and got everything squared away. Jenna called and asked for the kids' passports. She was planning a trip to Italy, to a town called Pesaro. Visas were secured quickly. Not long after, she called again to say she'd spoken to her father about me. Her dad looked into my background, approved of my work history, and even asked her to bring me in for an interview at one of his company's new branches. After a call with Jenna's father to hammer out the details of the job, title, salary, start date, I spoke to my boss. My boss, who'd been through 2 divorces himself, asked me how he could help. I told him I needed a quiet break and that I was hoping to be released from my contract. He thought about it, and after a moment, agreed. I had everything ready now. I told Rachel I'd be going on a short business trip, just 3 or 4 days. That same day, she told Brian I'd be out of town, and he sounded thrilled. Said his wife was away at a spa retreat for 2 weeks. Rachel asked me about the kids, and I told her I'd be taking them to my parents' house while I was gone. It was summer break, and they couldn't stay home alone. Rachel made a frustrated comment about not being able to have any more children. She half-jokingly suggested I just hire a nanny or leave them with my husband. We went over the plans for the next day. Rachel mentioned that her coworker, Veronica, would be heading out early in the morning, so I figured that would give me the window I needed. That night, I packed a travel bag, kissed Rachel goodbye, and left for the train station, only I didn't take the train. I hopped off after one stop, where a moving van I'd hired was waiting. We drove straight to my parents' house. I watched as Rachel left with the kids in a cab, headed to her parents' place. About 30 minutes later, she arrived at her mom's house, told them she was dropping off the grandkids, and asked when they could go to the beach. She promised to call every night, then jumped into another cab to head to work. Meanwhile, back at our apartment, I packed everything up. Clothes, kitchen stuff, the kids' things, every single item went into cardboard boxes. Within 90 minutes, everything was packed and loaded into the moving van. I kept a large suitcase and 2 travel bags separate, just in case. Once the car was ready, I called my dad and told him the movers were en route to his place. I'd join them in about a month. Rachel, meanwhile, told her boss I was out of town and the kids were with her parents, which meant she was free until Monday. Her boss gave her the green light to leave work an hour early. She clocked out, saying she had a client meeting, and not long after, Brian left too. Jenna had installed a tracker and a hidden mic in Brian's car. She saw the car start moving through the city, then turn down an alley and stop. Right after the doors shut, she heard Rachel's voice say something about needing to stop by the store. Brian laughed and said, "We've got everything we need at home." Around that same time, I pulled up to Rachel's parents' place and rang the doorbell. I was at Rachel's parents' place to pick up the kids. She had told them they'd be staying with their grandparents for 3 or 4 days, but I had a very different plan in mind. What they didn't know was that Rachel and Brian had cooked up a little celebration for what would have been our 10th wedding anniversary. Apparently, they had a surprise planned for her. 10 minutes later, I was at the airport with the kids, heading for a flight scheduled to leave in 2 hours. Back at Brian's place, Rachel walked into the kitchen, checked the fridge, and set the table. She asked Brian to pop open a bottle of champagne and playfully suggested they enjoy some chocolate later. Brian, a little thrown off, asked what they were celebrating. Rachel smirked and said, "It's our 10-year anniversary." Yeah. The same anniversary she decided to spend in another man's bed. One she only had thanks to her affair with a client's lawyer. They had dinner, then headed upstairs to the bedroom. Rachel cleared the dishes and left them in the sink. Afterward, they shared fruit and cognac at the coffee table before hopping into the shower together. When they were done, Rachel told Brian she'd call her parents, then she'd be all his. He nodded. She picked up her phone and quickly dialed my number instead. "Happy 10th anniversary," she said. I froze. "What?" "I'm in Brian's bedroom," she whispered. "Not wearing much. He's watching me talk to you." My heart cracked in half. I asked her not to go anywhere, that I'd come over and talk. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd come to her senses. Then Rachel broke down crying. Brian looked completely confused. And then the bedroom door flew open. In walked Jenna's parents, and right behind them, Jenna herself. Rachel scrambled to get dressed. Jenna's father asked Brian what was going on. "We were just having fun," Brian mumbled. Jenna's mom shook her head and made a snide remark about Brian standing there without clothes. That was the final straw for Jenna. She announced right then and there that she was done with him. Her dad told Brian to write up a resignation letter immediately, and warned him that if he screwed up again, he'd be fired completely. Rachel muttered a thank you and made a quiet exit. She returned to our apartment and found it empty. She tried calling me, but her signal dropped. Meanwhile, I'd just finished watching a live stream of the bedroom scene through a hidden webcam. I shut off my tablet and called Jenna. She told me they were on their way to the landing with the kids and hoped I'd call once we were back. Soon, we boarded our flight and headed to another city. Our travel plans synced perfectly, and we landed in Italy a few hours later. A representative from the company picked us up and took us to the hotel near the coast. The view of the sea from the window had the kids practically bouncing off the walls. They couldn't wait to get in the water. While checking in, we met a woman named Regina and her 7-year-old daughter, who had been on the same flight. Regina looked exhausted. Turns out she'd been sick during the flight. Her daughter, though, was bursting with energy and desperate to hit the beach. I offered to watch her daughter so Regina could rest, and she gratefully agreed. We followed a wooden staircase down to the shoreline. The kids were delighted to see little fish darting through the shallow water. I even managed to catch a small crab, which they thought was the coolest thing ever. Regina joined us not long after, feeling better and smiling. Back home, Brian was dealing with his own mess. With some help from his parents, he managed to land a 1-bedroom apartment. But finding work? That was another story. His savings kept him afloat for a bit, but every job he applied for turned him down. Executive roles were already filled, and he couldn't bring himself to apply for entry-level work. Eventually, he couldn't even get hired as a regular engineer. Rachel spent the next 2 days frantically searching for me and the kids around the city, but we were nowhere to be found. My dad later told me she had tried calling, but my parents told her I'd moved out and taken my things somewhere else without the children. She figured I'd gone on vacation and decided to stop by my office for answers. And that's when she found out. I had officially resigned from my job earlier that evening. Later that night, Rachel called Brian to check in. She asked how he was doing, and Brian told her about the tiny one-bedroom apartment he was stuck in and how tough it had been finding work. He was barely scraping by and getting more frustrated by the day. Rachel shared a bit about her own job, how the new branch office was being set up, but Brian didn't know anything about my plans. She told him she wanted to try and patch things up with me and the kids. Said she regretted the whole mess with him. Brian asked if she had any clue where I was, and Rachel admitted she had no idea. All she knew was that I had taken the kids and vanished on the same day everything had come crashing down. With no real answers and a heavy heart, Rachel decided to visit Jenna. She showed up at Jenna's cottage, and Jenna silently invited her in. They sat down in the large hall on the first floor. Rachel started off with an apology, asking Jenna to try and understand her actions. She questioned why Jenna was still working for the same company, and admitted she hadn't known about Jenna's history with Brian, or how deep their relationship had been. Jenna calmly explained that she had no idea Rachel had been involved with Brian either. They sat there for a long time, talking, bonding in a strange way over how both of them had been betrayed by the same man. Rachel confessed something painful. She'd come to realize that Brian would never accept her kids. And at that moment, she didn't even know where they were. Jenna tried to offer some comfort, reminding her that the kids were mine, not Brian's, and now that he was out of the picture, there was no real barrier keeping us from reconciling. Rachel shook her head. She told her she didn't need Brian anymore, not as a partner, not for anything. She said he'd reached out once he found out she was alone, asking if he could crash at her place, but she turned him down. Still, she was worried sick about not being able to find me or the kids. She knew I'd moved my things into my parents' house, but I wasn't staying there. She figured I must have taken the kids on vacation to the sea, but she had no idea when, or if, we'd come back. September was right around the corner, and school was about to start. She didn't know what to do or how to reach me. Jenna gently told her that she couldn't help with that, and honestly, it was unlikely I'd ever forgive Rachel, let alone take her back. Meanwhile, back in Italy, Regina and her daughter Rose had just checked out of the hotel and were heading into downtown Pesaro. I gave my kids a quick talk about where we were going and how to follow signs, stuff you don't always need back home but definitely matters here. Regina chuckled and asked if such a detailed explanation was really necessary. I nodded. Yeah, it is. Where we're from, bike lanes are mostly just talked about, not actually there. Over here, things are different. Pedestrian zones, bike lanes, car lanes, all clearly marked and respected. Cyclists don't ride on the sidewalks, even if they're empty. It was something new for all of us. We spent the evening wandering the city, eventually making our way to the Sphere Monument. Regina asked what it was, and I explained that it was the Sfera Grande by Arnaldo Pomodoro. He was born in Pesaro. I told her about some of the city's best spots, the sandy beaches, the clear sea, and the boardwalk with a long pier that stretched out into the water. Regina was impressed. She had no idea the city was this well known, or that Italy's history was so rich. You a history teacher or something? She asked. I smiled. Nope. Just did my homework. Figured if we're coming all this way, I should at least know what we're looking at. Saves us from wandering around confused. She mentioned wanting to visit the Lunavi Aquarium, and asked if it was nearby. I explained it was actually in Cattolica, about 22 kilometers away, maybe a 30-minute drive. She nodded, already sold on the idea. We chatted about the next day's plans. Regina said we could sleep in a bit since we were heading to the Rossini Theatre and the Old Town. But the day after? We'd be up early at 7 a.m., no way we came all this way just to sleep in. I laughed and agreed. We'll grab breakfast on the go, I told her, and assured her I already mapped out the route for the theater and Old Town. Then she asked where we should head next. I suggested a little restaurant nearby. Regina hesitated. Didn't we just eat? We'll just get a little something, I said with a grin. We strolled over to an open-air spot, grabbed a table, and the waiter handed us menus. We placed our orders quickly, me making sure the kids had something they'd enjoy. The food came, and we settled in, quiet, calm, far from the chaos we'd left behind. As we sat finishing up dinner, I asked Regina how she managed to travel with her young daughter, especially without a partner to help out. She told me she wasn't married. She and her ex had never made their relationship official. After Rose was born, he started pulling away, emotionally and physically, and eventually, he even brought another woman home. That was it for her. She packed up, left with her daughter, and considered moving back near her mom's place. She added that he hadn't shown the slightest interest in helping raise Rose. Her daughter's birth certificate even had a dash where the father's name should have been. Legally, she could take him to court for child support, but she wasn't interested in that. She said she'd raise her daughter on her own, no strings, no drama. Curious, I asked about her line of work. Regina told me she was a civil engineer. She managed to save enough for this trip by doing freelance jobs, mostly providing cost estimates for people working on home renovations or building projects. Unfortunately, the company she'd been working for went bankrupt, so she was technically unemployed at the moment. Still, she was optimistic about finding something new soon. As we sipped on some dry Italian wine, the kids dug into their seafood salad, laughing and making a mess in that carefree way only kids can. Regina mentioned her mom lived in a small village just 5 kilometers from the city center. I told her I'd just been appointed branch director in the city. She was surprised. Turned out, we were both originally from the same hometown. Small world. By the time we wrapped up dinner and made our way back to the hotel, it was late. I reminded Regina we had an early start in the morning. Tomorrow was aquarium day. The kids, still full of energy, asked what we'd be doing, and I told them we'd get to see sharks up close. The next morning, we made it to the Acquario di Cattolica, one of the most popular oceanariums in the region. We spent hours wandering through tanks filled with glowing jellyfish, rays, and giant sea turtles. The kids were especially thrilled with the interactive section where they got to gently touch some of the sea creatures. They couldn't stop smiling. After the aquarium, we figured it'd be better to eat somewhere nearby rather than at the pricey aquarium cafe. While walking toward the main road, we spotted a bus headed back to Pesaro and decided to hop on. About 40 minutes later, we were back at a familiar little seaside cafe. We ordered pasta and chicken parmesan, the kids digging in like they hadn't eaten all day. Even though it was the middle of Italy's notorious afternoon siesta, when most locals shut everything down, we decided to brave the blazing sun and hit the beach. We stopped at the hotel just long enough to grab our towels and meet again in the lobby before walking to the shore. The kids were out of their clothes and in the water within seconds. Regina and I followed, laughing as they chased small crabs darting between the waves. While we floated in the water, she looked over at me and asked quietly, "Is that why you're here? No wife on vacation?" I nodded, and told her the truth. My wife had been having an affair. With her ex, no less. The guy had married her for her job, for her connections. Even put her to work with him. Regina listened, her face softening. "So what now?" she asked. I told her I'd taken what I could, moved back to my parents' place, and decided to take the kids on vacation. There was no fixing what had happened. Reconciliation wasn't even on the table. She asked about the kids, if they were staying with me. "They're with me now, and they'll stay with me," I said. "Courts usually side with the mom, but once the kids turn 14, they get to choose who they want to live with. I'm just buying time until then." "So you're not getting divorced right away?" I shook my head. "Not yet. But I won't live with her again." She raised an eyebrow. "You think you can handle 2 kids on your own?" I gave her a small smile. "I'm already doing it." Then I shared a story about a friend. His wife left him and their 2 daughters. When she came back 8 years later, they wouldn't even open the door for her. By then, the divorce had already gone through. "What if your wife files for divorce?" Regina asked. I said that my son, Martin, might have a say in court. But ultimately, it wouldn't be up to him. I told her that, if needed, I'd keep the kids out of sight, even if it meant bending some rules. It wasn't ideal, but I wasn't about to let them be dragged through more chaos. Regina tilted her head. Do they even want to see their mom? Not right now, I said. And honestly, I doubt that'll change any time soon. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at me and asked, Would you accept my offer to come work at my branch? I told Regina I was open to the idea of working at her branch. I really wanted to, but I needed to find a place to live first. It was nearly impossible to get a job back in my neighborhood, and I didn't want to let my professional credentials go to waste. Regina promised she'd help me look for housing and get Rose enrolled in school near wherever we settled. Eventually, our vacation came to an end, and we headed back home. Once we were back, I took the kids out for school supplies. That afternoon, I gave Samuel a call to talk about staffing needs for the new branch, especially engineers and technical roles. I also mentioned Rachel's new position, just to give him a heads up. As for Brian, he'd completely vanished. No one had seen or heard from him since. On Sunday, I picked up Regina and Rose and brought them over to stay on the second floor of my parents' house. The kids were thrilled to have Rose living with them, and the three of them were excited to start school together. Regina spent Monday prepping for her first day on the job. I had my own responsibilities to take care of, while the kids had 3 more days of summer break and stayed home with my parents. Meanwhile, Rachel was still completely in the dark about where we were. She kept going to work, and every spare moment was spent trying to track us down. With the school year about to start, she assumed I'd bring the kids back. She went to their old school to check, only to find out that I had already transferred them to a school in a district near my parents' house. Rachel decided she tried to visit them on the first Friday of September. Back at the office, people were buzzing. There were all kinds of rumors about Brian's sudden disappearance and Rachel's unexpected move. No one knew what was going on, but everyone was talking. Word about the new branch office started to make the rounds, and eventually Rachel heard about it too. That Friday, Rachel took the day off, on her own dime, and headed to the regional district where my parents lived. She got there early, holding on to the address she'd managed to get. From a distance, she saw me leaving the house with Martin and Rose. I was walking beside a woman she didn't recognize, Regina. She followed at a distance, and watched as we dropped the kids off at school before heading to our offices. Once work hours began, Rachel walked into the front lobby. The young receptionist was shuffling papers when she arrived. The secretary called me and asked if I'd be willing to take a visitor. I said yes. Moments later, Rachel stepped into my office. I was at my desk, surrounded by stacks of documents. I stood up to greet her, and she nodded a hello. I motioned for her to sit, and she glanced around. Nice office, she said. Thanks, I replied. My assistant handled most of the setup. She got straight to the point. Rachel said she wanted to talk about what came next. She understood we probably weren't getting back together, but she didn't want to be shut out of the kids' lives. I told her I agreed. I intended to keep custody, but I also knew it was important for the kids to see their mom. She asked for reassurance that she wouldn't lose touch with them. I promised her that they were in school and that I had plans for the weekend, taking them mushroom hunting in the woods, actually. I told her she could visit them, but to please give me a heads up. Our schedule was pretty packed for the next few months. Rachel looked at me and said, "You always did love surprises." I laughed a little and told her we'd spent part of our summer on the Adriatic coast in Italy. She asked about Brian and whether I had changed my number. "Nope," I said. "Same number. I just turned it back on recently." After that, Rachel got up and left. At my suggestion, she stopped by a nearby cafe to gather her thoughts. I called Regina shortly after and filled her in on the conversation, especially Rachel's request to see the kids. Regina was calm but honest. She said keeping a mother away from her children might not be the best idea. We talked it through for a while. I told her I hadn't expected Rachel to show up. And truthfully, I wasn't sure what the right move was. Regina made it clear she wouldn't interfere. This was my decision to make. Mine alone. I paused, then said, I already made up my mind a long time ago, when. I made up my mind the day I found out Rachel had cheated, I told Regina. That decision hasn't changed, not then, not now. Her betrayal went on too long for me to pretend it didn't matter. Regina gently asked how long it usually took to recover from something like that. It depends, I said. Some people bounce back in a few months, others take a year or more. For women, it's often faster, maybe a month or two. Some want to get back with their partner, hoping to relive the love they lost. Others, they just want to start fresh, especially if there's no love left to hold on to. Later that week, I met Rachel at a small cafe like we'd agreed. I showed up a little early and found her already there, sitting across from Regina, who looked like she just finished crying. When I walked up, Rachel quickly told me I wasn't interrupting. They'd just been talking about coordinating school pickups, meals, and taking the kids to the park. Curious, I asked what else they'd talked about. Rachel said they'd gone over how we first met, and how her daughter liked spending time with me. Regina had described me as reliable, steady, and told Rachel not to confront me about the kids. I turned to Rachel and asked if she agreed with that. She nodded. She admitted she'd grown distant from the children over time. She regretted it deeply. She told me that back when Earl was still in the picture, she let most of the parenting fall on me. Looking back, she realized she just wasn't capable of doing it alone. But she also knew there was no chance I'd forgive her for the lies. Then she said something unexpected, that Regina seemed to understand her better than she understood herself. And that her daughter Mary had really taken to Regina's little girl, Rose. I asked if they planned to eat or stick around. Rachel said they were headed to the park to wait for the kids, told me they often went there to feed the swans. I said the kids would find them, no problem. We all left the cafe together and headed toward the park. I showed them a bench by the water and pointed out that it was one of our usual spots. Rachel looked out at the water and asked, Have the swans flown off yet? Not yet, I told her. But they will soon. They've already sent their young ones on ahead. She paused. Then asked something that caught me off guard. Why did you even marry me? I didn't sugarcoat it. You weren't the love of my life, I admitted. I married you because Brian pushed me to. He thought it would cover up his own mess with Jenna. She stared at me stunned. I went on. He used our marriage as a smokescreen. His own marriage was falling apart, and marrying you gave him cover. Rachel asked how Brian had taken things once the truth came out. He was jealous, sure. But powerless. When I got pregnant, he assumed the kid was his because you'd been away for a while. She blinked. And when I got pregnant again? That was a year and a half later, while I was away on business. And you, well, you were still seeing him. I asked if he still thought the kids were his. Rachel said Jenna had told her he couldn't have kids. That was something Jenna had made clear when they met, back when Rachel was looking for me. I pressed her. Do you believe her? Rachel shrugged. Who knows? Life's weird like that. Maybe Jenna just couldn't have kids either. Then she suggested something I'd already considered, a paternity test. Did you take one? I asked. She nodded. Well? I pushed. I don't know the results, she admitted. I never looked. I was stunned. Why not? Because it doesn't matter, she said quietly. They're my kids. I gave birth to them, even if I didn't raise them. And I'm not handing them over to anyone. She looked at me, searching for something. Are you even interested in knowing? She asked. I didn't hesitate. No. I'm not. In the months that followed, Regina and I filed for divorce from our former spouses. Rachel gave up custody without a fight. In court, it wasn't even contested. I was awarded full responsibility for raising the children. 6 months later, Regina and I got married. And I officially adopted Rose.